This program is brought to you by Titipounamu. Study, enjoy.
Today, my visitor is Debbie Miller. Debbie, a warm welcome and hi to my radio program.
Hello.
Debbie Miller is an active member of Beth Shalom, the Jewish Progressive Synagogue in Auckland. Debbie, you're fluent in English and Hebrew. What do you consider are the biggest differences between the two languages?
I would say, at least for talking about the Bible, some of the biggest differences are that Hebrew has a three-letter base system. So when you go to interpret everything that's written in the Bible and you look for those three base letters, it gives you a lot of different interpretations. It also is a gender-based language, so there's always has to be a gender attached to each thing. But just like you would say a chair is not specifically masculine or feminine, and it doesn't relate to any qualities of that chair, you oftentimes find genders attached to words, and so therefore people say, it's sexist, but it's not really. It's about agreement between, and it's about the necessity. But you speak German, so
Yes.
you know about gender agreement, which does not exist in English. So,
Yeah. But in most languages, many languages it exists, yeah.
Latin languages, yeah.
And all the Romance languages, yes, that's right.
Yeah.
And when you read the Torah, which is the 5 books of Moses, and we Christians say more the 5 books of Moses, how do you read it? Do you read it in Hebrew or do you read it in English?
Traditionally, we were commanded by Ezra and Nehemiah when they returned from Babylonia to have public readings, and they brought out each week a section. They divided the Torah portion up into 52 sections, and on Mondays, Thursdays, and Shabbat, Saturday morning, you're supposed to read a section of the Torah, and they each have a name and somewhat of a theme to them that holds it together, and we read it in Hebrew. Some people in more Reform synagogues, more liberal synagogues, also read parts of it in English as well, or in their native language in the country that they're living at that time. But that's much later in situation that exists. It's not the tradition. The tradition is to actually read it in Hebrew, and there's a lot of tradition attached to that. You sing it to a certain song that's called trope, and different cultures, like the Sephardic cultures, have certain tunes, and the Ashkenazic cultures have different tunes, depending on what part of the world you originated from. But it's always read in Hebrew.
And do you read it aloud or
Yes.
Always aloud?
Always aloud.
So
You sing it aloud.
So is there any reading of the Torah in quiet?
What do you mean by that?
Like you read it for yourself, or do you have to proclaim it to read it out loud for others?
We have to take a step back. First of all, in Judaism, there is a concept of community. And so the community comes together, which is a group of traditionally 10 men. In my synagogue, it can be men or women who are Jewish. And they come together, and within that context of 10, you're considered a community, and therefore you can do certain things. You can have aliyot, honors of going up to read the Torah, parts of the Torah portion. And that's supposed to be done out loud. You're also supposed to learn, as one of the famous scholars of Hillel and Shammai. Hillel said, explain to the Torah standing on one foot what it means. And he said, okay, do unto others as you'd like them to do unto you. And the rest is commentary. Go home and study. And so there's tons and tons of books out there to read and interpretations. And Talmud is like an enormous book with tons of interpretations from different authors and commentators down through the ages. And we're all supposed to be studying that. But 3 times a week, we're supposed to read it aloud as a community. So,
what do you do if you don't have 10 people?
You can't say certain prayers that require a community. To be a Jew is not a private thing. You're supposed to be a Jew in a community.
I like that, because the other day we just had a talk and the speaker said a Christian can't be a Christian on his or her own. You have to have at least another one. There might be something inherited. For those of you who have just tuned in, you're listening to Muffin Talk with Beate. My visitor today is Debbie Miller. Debbie is an active member of Beth Shalom, the Jewish Progressive Synagogue in Auckland. Debbie, one of the fascinating stories in the Bible is the creation story. And let's start with the beginning. What do we know from the very beginning according to the Hebrew text?
So, in the beginning, it says, Breshit bara Elohim et hashamayim ve'et haaretz. And Breshit, Rosh is the head, and it says in, ba means in the very beginning. And it doesn't ask you, okay, so let's justify that there's a God, that there might be a God. It's a declaration. God exists. There's no discussion. I mean, Jews argue about everything. If you look at all of our Talmuds, it's all about arguing. And a matter of fact, rabbis argue from one century to the next with the rabbi who said something 300 years earlier. And he says, and so said such and such. And you find it all over the place. When you study in a traditional Jewish center, you're supposed to sit with a partner and you're supposed to take the text and argue with each other about what the meaning of it is. The one thing that's not up for grabs is the argument of whether God exists or not. It's a given. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. It's not about arguing that. You can argue about what the meaning of in the beginning means. You can argue about, and this is what I was going to say, Elohim, which is, there are 12 different names for God in Hebrew that you find in the Bible. There are even other ones that you find in Kabbalah, which is later mystical Jewish interpretations. And that's Ein Sof, which is infinity, that there is no end. But in the 12 different names, the first name that you come upon in the Bible is Elohim. And as I was talking to you earlier about the grammatical difference, it's really interesting, and it gives much more meaning to it when you look at it in Hebrew, because in Hebrew, Elohim is with a Yud Mem at the end. And Yud Mem means plural masculine, which means, like, first of all, what is God doing with plural? I mean, our whole major revolutionary breakthrough about being Jewish is that it's one God. So why do we have Elohim saying on high? Elo means up there, high, above, superior, something to that effect. And Elohim means plural superiors. So, excuse me? How did we get a plural God when we're always talking about there being one God?
And you know that in Latin tradition you have the majestatis pluralis majestatis, which is the plural of appreciation, of respect.
And so what really freaks me out, then you go on and you say bara, and bara, which is the word creation, we're only, the second word into the sentence and we're already having huge, really disagreement. We're having a plural noun with a singular verb. Why is that? It doesn't make sense. It's not an agreement. Well, the reason is because if you look at the Shema, which is the most important prayer in Judaism, which says, Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad. Hear, O Israel, Adonai my God, Eloheinu our God, is the same one God, Echad. Okay? So, and when they're saying this plurality, they're talking about that issue, which is each individual. When we all come out and we have to say we believe in one God, we all have different concepts of that. You look at God as an old man in the sky with a beard passing judgments. Another looks at it as nature, and actually Rambam actually uses in his Guide to the Perplexed, which is the definitive book that is a proof text about the existence of God. One of them is that nature, When you go out and see the beauty of nature, it's a proof text that God exists. And what's truly amazing is that we all have different ways of looking at God. But that is one, that Elohim, all of our different ways of looking at God, it's God. You know, it's one. You may look at it this, you may come at it from this. We're all praying to the same God. And in order for us to have community, in order for us to pray together as a community, we have to say, okay, we're on that same page. We're praying to the same God. We're following the same laws. And that's what this is about. And I think within the first 3 words of the Bible, they address that plurality and that disconnect between all of us in our interpretation to a certain degree. And so when you say Bereshit bara Elohim et Shemaim bet haaretz, you're actually saying all of our gods, that's the one who created the heavens, everything, the universe, everything that exists as we know it. And what's interesting about the Hebrew also is that then we get to the second word, which is bara. And as I said, Hebrew has 3-letter roots, which is bet, resh, aleph in this verb, and it means to create. But the only person who can do bara, create, which is used here, is God. Humans do not bara. I do not create life. I do not create the difference between the heavens and the earth. I do not separate the sea and make fish and all those other things that come along in the creation story. That's a God process. But then you go down the line and you get to chapter 2. You get to chapter 2 and you get a different name for God, which is Yud-He Vav-He. And that's interesting because that name for God only comes into being when humans are created. Because Yud-He Vav-He, if you look at it in, I wish I had a blackboard I could show you, except I'm going to have to verbalize it. But so it's the unspoken name of God. We don't know how it's pronounced anymore. We've lost that ability to say it. They used to say it on Yom Kippur when the Holy of Holies went into the priest, the high priest went into the Holy of Holies on Yom Kippur and asked forgiveness for the Jewish people. And the Yud-He Vav-He is, if you look at it grammatically, it's the compilation of is, was, and will be. Everything that is now and was in the past and will be in the future. Now,
it's a process.
Maybe. There's lots of different ways you can do the Jewish discussion here and have a disagreement. I don't know if it's a process. For me, it looks like once humans came into the process and we are in God's image, we are the doing of the future. I mean, this is, I can't quote a rabbi who said this, but everybody agrees that it is a compilation of the verb lihiot, which is to be. And that's not in disagreement. But whether it's because humans came on the scene, it is clear that we start using that name for God once humans are here. And before that, we're talking about the different points of view we all come at it from. So I always find this really interesting that it's really important to us, God's name. And when you translate it into English, God's name sort of just dissolves. You don't see God's name anymore. It's just G-O-D, which has no specific, underlying meanings and power to it. And for us, the name of God is totally powerful. It has mystical powers. It has other interpretations. And so it's very important.
It's not just a name; it's an identity. It's more than we can imagine.
It's an interpretation. It's a mystical power. It's they even give it numeral values.
And the name that when Moses asked what shall I say to the people? Who am I? Is that the same word that he was using?
Yeah. That I love that name. Actually, that is such a great name because it's like what will be that will be, and it's the ultimate philosopher's response. Okay. Anything and everything that you can conceive of will be, and I'm the future. It's actually much more futuristic looking. Yeah is.
So it's a different name again to what
totally different name, and it's actually talking about a very different process. The process, as I see it, and there's lots of different interpretations. So I'm not definitive on this, to put it mildly, but would be really interesting to say is that, first we're starting out with this plural God, and then we get to the God that is talking about a future and the fact that we are actually now involved in the creative process. And one of the things I want to say about creativity, in Judaism, artists are called oman, and art that you produce is called omanut. And omanut is the same base letters as that you say when you say amen. So every time you say amen, you're in a prayer. In English, you're actually saying a Hebrew word, which means you're putting your hand up and saying, he just said blah, 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 and I said amen. I believe. So artists are believers. People who are doing creative processes, people who are being creative are doing something that is definitely godlike. But it's not bara. It's not bet resh aleph, which is God created the heavens and the earth. That's a different ball of wax. But clearly, doing something that is omanut, that is of the believers, is definitely in the spiritual realm. And if you really want to be like God, you will be doing something creative. And I just think that's like, whoa.
They have different words for creation, for creative, for create, and that helps you to understand which belongs to God. You see the verb, and you already know that it's related to God, that no human being can create the way that God created.
Absolutely. And therefore there's a totally different word, but it is totally connected. You know what? When we use the word in English for art, it means artificial. It means a copy of what is real. Totally different base meaning entirely when you talk about it in Hebrew. And that's what I really love about Hebrew. Hebrew, behind every letter and word and vowel, there's an interpretation. And it really gives a very different play on, even the first three words of the book of creation, because it tells you, it points its finger and says, this is what's important. We took a jump. The God who did this and the God who's over dealing with human beings and putting us forth on this earth to do God-like works. In other words, we are the hand of God. We're creative, we're being godlike, we're being the artist, we're carrying on his or her creative process, and we are also incredibly instilled with this responsibility to move forward in this world, that work which God originally started.
And when you talked a little bit about the numbers and the figures, and in the Bible there are lots of numbers and figures, and many people say, well, there are hidden messages behind the numbers. Is that also the case in Genesis?
Well, first of all, gematria is the study of the numeral value of the words and the letters. I am not a follower of gematria. it is due to the fact that in the Hebrew language, the letters were given numeral values because that was the way the counting system was developed. Okay, so Aleph is 1. It's a base 10 system, and Lamed is 300, and so on and so forth. So you get this I'm not very good at the gematria numbers, but it's something like that. Anyway, you get this system that exists, and then they give it extra meaning. And really, rabbis who study it very thoroughly can give you all sorts of alternative importance to the different things. That which you do not know, you should not belittle. So it's just not my cup of tea. So I can't really say what it means.
If we go back to the creation story, I was wondering, is there also a specific time of the year and the feast years in the Jewish culture and Jewish tradition when you listen to the story specifically?
Yes. Well, first of all, as I said in the beginning, the Ezra and Nehemiah came by and they back from Babylon after being exiled, and they wanted to bring the people together and reinvigorate them with the Jewish traditions and the stories. And so they divided the Bible up into 52 weeks. And those divided weeks end at Sukkot, which is like October. We're a lunar calendar, so it fluctuates. But it's sometimes September, October, and it starts again with the reading on Simchat. And it starts again with the reading, and that first reading starts on the last day of Sukkot. Okay? And it always starts then. The book starts reading then. However, just to take a step back, because you're asking, is there specific stories read at specific times? Yes. Then in addition to that, on certain holidays, we have stories that get read again. So sometimes you'll have weeks where you have a double portion because it's the week before Rosh Hashanah, and the week before Rosh Hashanah you read a certain part of the Torah that talks about the Yom Kippur, Rosh Hashanah coming up, or it's Passover when we exited from Egypt, so we have to read another certain part. We'll keep reading the parsha that we're supposed to be reading in the line, but we'll also read that specific one to that holiday that it applies. So there's a specific one for before Rosh Hashanah, and there's a specific one for Passover, and there's a specific one for Sukkot, and it's usually related to in the text, and that's why they say it then.
Mm-hmm. So you also start, in a way, your year, because the Jewish year starts in September, October?
We have 3 New Years in Judaism.
Well, I think that we'll have to take that for another interview.
Yeah, but you're right. It does start. You go Rosh Hashanah is in September. I just being really...
We almost come to the end of the interview already, and we haven't even gotten to Adam and Eve. But just shortly, because they are different creation stories. So,
yes, they are.
So you understand the Hebrew texts, and
there's still different creation stories.
Yes. Can you give us maybe an overview of the creation of Adam and Eve, just in a few words, because there are lots of challenges regarding the side of Adam, or was it a rib of Adam, and all these stories. Maybe you can give us one version, your preferred version of how Adam and Eve were created.
Okay. Well, my preferred version is that God created a man and a woman, and they didn't create Adam and Eve. I find that to be... well, it's not my preferred version. I just want a God. There's a second point in the story where it just says God created man and woman at the exact same time, no ribs. And actually Adam, which is Adama, same word as earth, okay, is just meaning human. I think that it's, I don't get this. They just needed to make the story work. Well, I shouldn't say that. The story does work because there's Eve, and they had to have the ability to procreate. So but I really believe that God created humans, and Ish and Isha. Ish is the same letters as fire, and Adama and Isha is just with a hay on the end, which is the feminine version. I am not convinced that there was a rib taking or a dust or any of those things.
Can you repeat that with Ish and Isha?
Ish is the masculine form, and Isha is the feminine form, and Esh, which is same Aleph Shin, is fire, and Adama is earth. So I think
So like the elements.
I think if you're into evolution, which I am, it makes a lot of sense, because the fire and the earth and the land and the water were incremental to the ability to make amino acids and develop life on Earth. And it makes total sense that those names would be the names that would be elemental to human life and the existence of humans. So, but I wasn't planning on talking about Adam and Eve, so there you got me a little off my feet there. But I'm very uncomfortable with the rib from Adam, the story, because I think inherent in that sort of helpmate sort of thing, which is definitely a word that's used in Hebrew a lot, Ezra Kenegdo, the woman who stands in opposition to her husband. It's not a very nice, the helper who's like in conflict, which is what happened between Adam and Eve, is a topic I'm uncomfortable with.
Yeah. But thank you very much for enlightening us with the meaning of the first three words in the Bible. And I think that also with Ish and Isha and Adama, that is really helpful. Wish you all a good Friday and a good week ahead. And thank you very much, Debbie, for having come.
Shabbat Shalom.